Today I'm going to be doing a video on a Miata buying guide, because I always get a lot of questions asking, what should I look for on my Miata? So the first thing I'm going to go over is the short nose crank. So let me just grab my light real fast. Alright, so see on my crank, so since this is a 91, you only have to worry about this on the 1.6s. But since this is a 91, you have to worry about it a ton. So see how I have 8? A short nose crank has 4 of those little bolt holes like things in it. I don't know exactly what they're called, but see on that crank pulley how it's got 8 instead of 4. This is one of the main things because most Miatas around like 190,000 to 200 miles, that'll just fly off and break the crank and you have to repair the motor. And then what you also want to look for is leaking around this. And then, oh yeah, it's on the other side. Sorry. I haven't cleaned this off since I fixed it, but you do not really want to see that because that's always a bad sign. Because it means your cast O-ring is leaking, so you have to take that all off. And I'll do a video on that because mine's about time to replace too. You also don't want to see any liquid leaking down the engine bay, specifically coolant, because that's never a good sign. And if you got oil leaks, it means you probably need to change your valve cover gasket and your cast O-ring and your crank pulley O-ring. Yeah, there we go. Then I got you always want to check the motor mounts down there. See, mine are in pretty good condition. Not really solid, not too soft. Yeah. I always recommend checking for how much meat is left on your brake pads. And I can't fit my camera in there. But I always recommend checking the suspension due to being old. About like 30. See, I need to change my front bushings because on my rear I have poly. But for being almost 30 years old for most NA Miatas, you want to make sure the bushings have been changed out because, or at least in decent condition, because it's 30-year-old suspension. You also want to make sure you got new shocks because a lot of them OEM ones like to leak. Another thing you want to check for is rust on the rocker panel cover. Ugh, can't talk today, sorry. But you want to make sure it's rust free due to there's always another Miata, and if it's rusted out, you don't want to put in the money. You also want to make sure you get a manual transmission. They run a lot better. But yeah, so. And if you're looking at a 1.8 motor, here, I'll show you an example of my 1.8 motor over here. Mind the mess. I am working on this motor, putting it back together, so I got a mess everywhere. So on a 1.8, you do not have a short nose crank. It's just the normal nose crank. But yeah, so with a blown head gasket, It normally blows between the heads and the holes between the oil and the coolant. Most of the time it blows between the 4th cylinder and the 3rd cylinder due to less cooling, so it'll blow between all this. As you see, this is actually still good, even though it needs to be replaced when put back on due to tearing the engine apart. And there's also how you can tell if it's a 1.8 motor is if it's got exceeding lettering on it and numbers, because it'll be sunken in if it's a 1.6. But then there's also the location of the cast, because on a 1.6 it's over here, but it's on this one. It's over here on this one. See, this needs a new valve cover due to, you can see all the leak around it. That was still good. And then when you want to always make sure these are not leaking too. These like to break. And see, this cast O-ring was actually replaced recently due to being super clean. You always want to check the condition of the clutch. 2, you want to make sure it's not seized or anything. And you always want to make sure you have a good thermostat. And always ask for the service history of like when the last oil change was, when he did all the different fluid changes and everything like that. And if you got a plastic radiator, I would recommend changing it out to aluminum, but it's not the end of the world. You just want to make sure it's still holding and not leaking. So if you're buying an automatic, it always comes with a metal radiator. I think it's just a normal metal one, but still recommend, even with an automatic, swapping it to manual and then running a aluminum radiator. I bought my car as automatic and swapped it over, so I still have the automatic radiator, but I don't need to change that out because it still holds really good. Yeah, there's my guide to buying a Miata.